Well, good morning. It is Wednesday, April 31st, and we are gathered here for a morning devotion on the last week of using N.T. Wright's book, Lent for Everyone, the Gospel of Mark. And today's passage is Mark 14, verses 53 through 65. They took Jesus away to the high priest. All the chief priests and the elders and the legal experts were assembled. Peter followed at a distance and came to the courtyard of the high priest's house, where he sat with the servants and warmed himself against the fire. The chief priests and the Sanhedrin looked for evidence for a capital charge against Jesus, but they couldn't find any. Several people invented fictitious charges against him, but their evidence didn't agree. Then some stood up with this fabricated charge that said, "We heard him say that he will destroy the temple which humans have made, and in 3 days I'll build it made without human hands." But even so, their evidence didn't agree. Then the high priest got up in front of them, all of them, and interrogated Jesus. "Haven't you got an answer about whatever it is these people are testifying against you?" Jesus remained silent and didn't answer a word. Once more the high priest questioned him. "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," replied Jesus. "And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." "Why do we need any more evidence?" shouted the high priest, tearing his clothes. "You heard the blasphemy. What's your verdict?" They all agreed on their judgment. "He deserves to die." Some of them began to spit on him. They blindfolded him and hit him and said, "Prophesy." And the servant took charge of him and beat him. I remember as a child being fascinated with some really old Russian dolls. Made out of thin wood, they came apart in the middle with a satisfying squeak, revealing a smaller one inside, then the next and the next. Eventually, you reach the smallest, a tiny doll still perfectly formed and painted. You can, of course, set them alongside one another on the mantelpiece, but you can also put them back together and enjoy the knowledge of what's hidden inside the one you can still see. Many years later, I came upon a set of Russian dolls that made a quirky political point. It was while Mikhail Gorbachev was in charge of the old Soviet Union, at the time when it was undergoing its astonishing transformation. So the outer doll, the biggest one in the collection, was Gorbachev himself. Inside him was Chernenko, and inside him, Andropov, another whom ruled for a long time. Inside Andropov was Brezhnev, one of the key figures in the Cold War of the 60s and 70s. Inside Brezhnev was Khrushchev, whom I remember from my young days, and inside Khrushchev was the old man himself, Joseph Stalin, responsible for the death of tens of millions of his own people. The point was starkly clear. They're basically all the same. One up, one, and you'll find the open one up and you'll find the other. Now there are two ways in which this illustration can help us into a fuller understanding of what's going on into this dense and frightening scene. The confrontation between Jesus and the high priest. First, let's open up the high priest himself and see what we can find inside. Caiaphas was part of the ruling elite, the wealthy Jerusalem aristocracy. He was a politician to his fingertips, who knew all the dodges and tricks to try to balance out what Rome expected of local leaders on the one hand, and what the ordinary people expected their priests on the other hand. He could, of course, take the high moral and theological ground at the drop of a hat, so he does what he shouts, blasphemy, and tears his clothes as a sign of his supposed horror at such a thing. Any first century Jew would have told you that Caiaphas was just like his predecessors, heavily compromised, out for his own end, staying in power at whatever cost there might be to everyone else and into the integrity of Judaism. Open them up, and you'll find a string of other time-serving leaders going back several centuries, far longer than the leaders of communist Russia. But Mark isn't interested in going back another stage behind this. When Jesus gives his final answer, he quotes Daniel 7. you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming from the cloud of heaven. Go back to Daniel 7 and see when one like the Son of Man is seen, coming with the cloud of heaven. That's chapter 7, verse 13. And this is the heart of the great court scene in which God himself is vindicating his people against the wicked attack of the monsters who have opposed and oppressed him. Now here, Mark is saying this is the great court scene, the climax of the gospel so far, and Caiaphas is cast in the role of the fourth and final monster, perhaps even the little horn of Daniel chapter 7. Even if we think it likely that Mark envisions Rome itself as the fourth monster in Daniel's schemes, Caiaphas is here to act as chief spokesman, open him up. And inside of the wise, devout leader of God's people, you see a blasphemous, arrogant opponent of God's kingdom. Now try the same with Jesus. Throughout the gospel, he is seen as a prophet. He's now accused of being a false prophet, announcing the destruction and rebuilding of the temple. That's why, when they decide he's guilty, the mocking crowd gather around him, blindfold him, and invite him to prophesy, guessing who has been hitting him. But, though being a false prophet and speaking against the temple was a serious and possible fatal charge, Caiaphas opened up the first Russian doll and peers inside. If you're making claims about destroying and rebuilding the temple, does that mean you think you're the Messiah? It is, after all, the Messiah who has the rights over the temple, even since David's plan and Solomon built it. Caiaphas here thinks of messiahship simply in terms of human kingship. But this time it is Jesus. And then Mark tells the story who opened the disguise still further. Yes, Jesus is a prophet, a true prophet. Yes, he is the Messiah, the one who has the right to declare the temple redundant and to compromise and to promise a God-given replacement. But inside that, he is much, much more. He is the one who will be exalted after his suffering to sit at the right hand of power, that is, of God. Jesus here has combined Daniel 7 with Psalm 110, which becomes a favorite text in the early Christian movement. He has discovered in the scriptures the two texts which speak more plainly of the fact that when Israel's representatives have completed his appointed task, he will take his rightful place beside God himself, sharing, as it were, the very throne of God, or perhaps sitting on a second throne right behind him. That is where we discover the secret that lay behind the dialogue of love and agony in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is where we learn that within the profiles of prophets and Messiah, there is a hidden secret identity. Now at last, now when it can no longer be misunderstood in terms of self-serving power, now when he is bound to be misunderstood, and when his judge are bound to find him guilty, now at last, Jesus can do what God himself does at the moment of the Exodus. Now at last he can reveal who he really is. This is our God, the servant king. It's a wonderful, wonderful written passage there. And so what he's saying is at this moment when Caiaphas and Pilate are asking him and he answers that question, he says, "Are you the Messiah?" And he says, "I am," which is the wrong answer because those are the words that God said to Moses at the burning bush when he asked him what his name is. "I am." And then he quotes Daniel 7, "And you will see the Son of Man coming down on the clouds from heaven and seated at the right hand of God." This is the moment where Jesus reveals to the world that he is the Messiah. In those simple statements, "I am," and you will see the Son of Man coming down from the clouds, sitting at the right hand of God, from Daniel. That's the moment when he reveals that he is the Messiah. What a great story to be doing it right here in front of Caiaphas and all the high priests and everybody to say, "Here I am your Messiah, and you are about to betray me and put me to death." Because as he explains, Caiaphas and others were thinking of worldly stuff. They didn't think this was the way a Messiah acted. This is not what they expected. But they were concerned with power, their own glory, their own money, everything they had, they would have lost, including the temple. But Jesus says, no, I am the Messiah. So let it be done as you wish. Because by putting me to death, you're not going to destroy me. You're going to make me more powerful. This moment is like the ultimate point, the penultimate moment in Mark's story of the gospel, and he wants us to see that more clearly. He uses Psalm 110 and Daniel 7 to prove that he is the Messiah. We don't see that as we read it. We don't get it. But they knew exactly what he was saying. Jesus is the Messiah. He used those words, almost used those words at least, in front of the high priest and in front of Pilate. He revealed himself finally to the world, and they put him to death. Go forth this day in the peace and the love of Christ.